Okay, good. All right, now, welcome to our legislative forum, all right? We have a little innovation here. We have these two fine young ladies here who are going to be your timekeepers when you go up there. Remember, you're limited your questions to 1 minute, and one of these fine ladies, when you got 15 seconds left over, is going to prominently go like this, all right, to let you know that you need to wrap up your remarks, all right? And what we'll do is we'll take you in order that you stand up behind the podium. When we take a break, I will tell people when the break is pending, and so you can sit down and resume your position on the line in the same order after the break is over. And I want to welcome the 5 legislators made it. Did anybody talk to Senator Walz? Is he going to be planning on making it?
He didn't say he wasn't.
Okay, well, so we have our 5 of our 6 legislators here, and we will start as we usually do by having the one of the legislators, and I suspect it will be Senator Lofgren, start with some opening remarks on what's going on in the Assembly, and then we'll pass her down to the other legislators in their order, and then we'll begin the questioning.
Hi, everybody. Good to see everybody. First of all, I want to congratulate the L&M girls bowling team that won state again. They won last year, and we were fortunate over the summer. They came up and they met with the governor, and I toured them. We had a nice time. So I might just go over my committees again for some of you that weren't here last time. I'm the chair of Economic Development, the Budget Sub, which deals with coastal affairs, Iowa Economic Development Authority, IFA, Workforce, the Regents, and the World Food Prize and other agencies. And then I'm the vice chair of oversight. I'm on local government appropriations, veterans affairs, education. I'm on IPER's system retirement plans. We look at all the different retirement plans. And then I'm on the Iowa Economic Development Authority board. And then task force the governor put me on was Invest in Iowa task force that we're looking at the rural areas and see what we can do to help them. And I guess last I want to mention, I know John DeBeat's coming up Monday. We're rolling the red carpet out for him, obviously, so we'll see him then.
Good morning, everyone. I timed that perfectly. I did that on purpose. I want to thank you all for a great attendance this morning. I'm Bobby Kaufman, and I want to mention a few bills that are moving that I'm in charge of that might not make all the headlines, but I always say that you don't ever know exactly what you're going to work on when you go to Des Moines until you get there and get assigned bills. And so next week, we're going to be running in Judiciary the governor's constitutional amendment on felon voting rights. And I'm very interested to see the public's input on what restrictions will be possibly put on that. What Florida recently just did was they prohibited particular classes of criminals, murderers, rapists, child molesters, etc., from ever having that right should they ever get out of jail. Others have proposed restitution limits and requirements. I don't come into this with a preconceived notion because I had no idea I was going to be working on this. It just got handed to me, and then I got called into the governor's office to talk about it. So that's one thing. Sports wagering is another issue that I did not know that I'd be working on until I got there, but I've learned that is a $150 billion black market entity that's going on right now, and so the choice isn't to deal with it or not deal with it. It's whether to regulate and tax it or continue to ignore the problem as it grows bigger and bigger. And then finally, one of the biggest issues I heard about during the campaign season was combating people that had the predisposition to torture pets. And in Judiciary, we're working on a bill that will raise those penalties, as well as we have a bill in state government to combat the bad puppy mills, the one that make the papers, the ones that have puppies and kittens in positions that are so heinous that you wouldn't even let animals like pigs be in them. And so that's what I'm working on, and I'm looking forward to all of your questions.
Good morning. It was nice Bobby got here, so when Walter said there were 5 of us, now there are 5 of us, okay, this morning. I'm Gary Carlson, and I chair Commerce Committee this year. I'm also on Ways and Means, Economic Growth, and Transportation. And so this is a busy time of the year, and you're focused a lot on the legislation that especially that is in the committees that you're dealing with, because that's what you're going to be discussing and determining whether legislation is going to move forward or not. And sometimes bills land. I see Kurt back there. Sometimes bills get introduced, and some of you send me emails before I've even seen the bill. So I'm sure we'll have some conversations about that bill later today regarding acquisition of properties and maintaining of properties by the parks and stuff. But the story is not quite as bad as maybe it seems with that bill occurred. We'll talk about that later. This week will be the funnel week, which means that legislation that doesn't pass out of a committee in either the Senate or the Chamber, those bills will not continue to move forward unless they're Ways and Means bills or appropriations bills. And it's a way of getting down from some almost, 1,600 bills that have been introduced this session to get down into a priority system. So it will be an interesting and long week of committees as we move forward. But we'll just open up for your questions, and we'll talk about any specific legislation you want to talk about.
Well, good morning. I'm Dave Kerr, represent District 88, and I'm on the Ag Committee, Appropriations Committee, Public Safety Committee, Education, and the chairman of the House Education Appropriations Committee. This week in Public Safety, we passed out a bill that's going to the floor about Second Amendment language into their Constitution. And my emails are on that, and also on budget issues for the community colleges, the state universities. Along those lines, people are quite interested in funding for those groups. Getting a lot of emails, of course, like Gary said, on conservation issue. And just because Gary alluded to this, that just because a bill is written doesn't mean that will go very far or stay the same as it is given out, so or written, drafted. So I expect, if anything, this bill will get a good form on Monday. The House, it's the land acquisition bill of Senate Representative Seek, and the Senate, they're going to have a subcommittee on Monday at 10, and the House is at 10:30. If you're interested in driving to Des Moines and visiting with Representative Seek on those bills, or the House bill anyhow. So that's an option if you're really interested in going to Des Moines on Monday.
Good morning, everyone. Senator Tom Green. I have the 44th District, which is all of Des Moines County, all of Louisa, and the rural parts of Muscatine counties. I serve on appropriations, health and human services, local government, and I also serve on the appropriations for economic development with Senator Lofgren. I do want to point out, I did bring up a map over here that shows one side is all the House districts and how they are spread out, and the flip side is all the Senate districts. So if you want to know on, how far-reaching all these districts are, like I said, it's quite a ways from, I live on the south side of Burlington up to Wilton, which is still in my area. So, the districts sometimes are spread out, but that's representative government. One thing I want to talk about a little bit this morning is we moved a resolution through the Iowa Senate through the full committee, appropriations full committee, on the 99% spending limitation. I think this is critically important for our state. What this resolution generally does, it would be a resolution to the Iowa Constitution. It has to be passed by 2 consecutive sessions, which would limit the state government from spending no more than 99% of what the budget revenue projects. The first 2 years that I was in Des Moines, we had to sign on de-appropriation bills. We had overpromised and overspent at the state level, and we had to take money back from our schools, cities, counties, and that just destroys budgets. There's no way that your elected officials can effectively manage their local budgets when a de-appropriation hits. So I think this is just prudent government. We can't do that in our home businesses with our home finances, so I think it's just a positive step for the Iowa taxpayers and the Iowa citizens. Like someone also alluded to, this is funnel week, so all the bills will be funneling down. The individual chairs of all these committees have to decide on which bills they want to move forward, and then it's up to the leadership of the majority party as to which bills will be either put on the back burner for next year or will move forward towards floor debate. So now's when things get interested, and now is when we need to hear from our citizens. So if you have concerns, whether it's one specific bill or something in general, make sure you reach out to all of us and speak up. We need to hear your opinions and your voices.
And we will now begin the questions. Starting with Mr. Clark.
I'm Dan Clark from the Alexander G. Clark Foundation. We had some great events in the past few days, and I particularly want to thank Senator Lofgren and Representative Carlson for their remarks on their respective floors on Monday in observance of Alexander Clark's birthday. This is not only nonpartisan stuff, this is stuff we should all take pride in as Muscatine folks and as Iowans. When these guys get up in Des Moines and talk about Alexander Clark, it's more than something decorative we do for Black History Month or something. I'm with Paul Thielman this morning. We went to Des Moines on Tuesday to the Drake Law School and heard the Chief Justice of the Iowa Supreme Court, and I'm not exaggerating, tell us that Iowa jurisprudence is really based on the Clark case. There goes my flashing light. Thank you, gentlemen.
Do you want to your response to Mr. Clark? Not necessary. Okay. Thank you. Next question.
I'm Roddy Templer. I'm from Stanwood, Iowa, and grew up in Cedar County. Regarding the Second Amendment and anything dealing with the Second Amendment in the state of Iowa, my understanding is that Iowa Constitution has to comply with the United States Constitution where individual rights are concerned. And with regards to the Second Amendment, there should be no law against that Second Amendment. And so it seems like there's a lot of tweaking going on with the Second Amendment within the state of Iowa that is actually going beyond the role of the state, because these individual rights should be ours regardless of the state in which we live. There should be compliance throughout the states. I'd like some response to that.
Well, thank you for your comments. I think the Second Amendment is extremely important. I'm really not a hunter or an outdoorsman, but I sincerely respect and I think that's just a critical position. I have absolutely no problems at all with you as a law-abiding citizen having the right to carry. So I will never vote anything against that infringes on that right, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, that's very important, and you can tell that by the amount of emails I get from people that want this in the Iowa Constitution. An interesting point is that when we passed it out of the Public Safety Committee meeting last week, all the Republicans voted for it, and the Democrats voted against Second Amendment rights.
Yes, you're right. The federal Constitution has very strong language in the Second Amendment right. The Iowa Constitution is fairly silent on that, and that's one of the reasons to make sure that the Iowa Constitution clearly aligns with the federal Constitution.
Thank you.
I obviously support the Second Amendment, and I'm currently not a hunter, but I remember when I was younger, my uncles would come back from Vietnam, and then we would go hunting. So, but I will say most of the bills run on the judiciary. I'm not on that committee, and kind of like Gary had alluded to, we're so focused on what we're doing to get bills out of funnel for next week that some of these bills we probably haven't spent a lot of time on yet, but we will.
It's nice to see a face from Cedar County, so welcome down to Muscatine County. I strongly support the constitutional reciprocity amendment. I voted for it last year. I'll be frank, Paul Pate screwed up. Our Secretary of State needed a post in the newspapers, and he messed up, so now we have to start all over again. You know, I watched the federal Congress pass that bill this week, which I would have voted no on, and it just mystifies me that people want to give themselves a false sense of security that, oh, good, we passed the gun restriction law. Now all those darn criminals will listen to us. I've never heard of a criminal that said, I'm going to go commit a crime today, but shucks, they passed a bill, I can't do that anymore. Trying to keep law-abiding citizens away from their Second Amendment right to protect yourselves from criminals is like trying to combat drunk driving by banning sober drivers. So I will always be with you on the Second Amendment.
Thank you. If I may reclaim just a few seconds of my question time.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Don Paulson. I live in 76 Township. Will Senate File 156, the Medicaid Improvement Bill, be given serious consideration this legislative session?
Great question. I think that it will. We just had an oversight hearing with the two MC approve. Our Medicaid services is absolutely a priority of ours. Thank you for the question.
I'm not on Health and Human Services, but I would agree with what Bobby had said. I think we want to improve everything, so I think that's, something everybody's on top of. So, like I said, we'll be looking at all those bills very soon.
Don, I'm not exactly sure what's in Senate File 156 and if there's a House companion bill to that. I only know from conversations with Shannon Lundgren, the state representative that heads Health and Human Services for us, that she is clearly working on legislation to continue that improvement process. I just don't know whether it mirrors that bill. I also helped co-sponsor with some other legislators a bill in Health and Human Services to also deal with some of the mental health issues as well. So there's a number of bills that they are dealing with, but we had pretty strong oversight language in the legislation last year, and part of that was to do follow-up this year to make sure those things are being done.
I'm not really familiar with the Senate bill, but I've talked to Shannon, just like many of us have, about this because we get talking about it at different forums and out in the public. People want to know about this type of bill, and she is working diligently on trying to find something that will improve the Medicaid services here in Iowa.
I do serve on that Senate Health and Human Services Committee. I think that budget is the second largest in the state other than education. So it's a huge dollar issue. The point I've always tried to make, when I floated a bill last year, did not move. I hope it will be addressed further this year. There are people in our community who obviously need our help, need our assistance, and I don't think there's a one of us here who's saying, no, we're going to cut you off. It's not pushing grandma off the cliff in her wheelchair. But if there's 5% waste, fraud, and abuse in the system, we need to eliminate that 5% so that those funds can go to those citizens who truly need our help and our assistance. And so that's the crux of my bill. And I'm hoping that it will move forward this year. I think, sometimes it takes a couple of years to get things, get the grease under the wheels. So we need to keep moving on it. We need to keep looking at it. Obviously, we want a system that is compassionate, that is caring, but is also just and right. So let's make sure we move in that direction. Thank you for your question.
Mrs. Landy?
Hello, I'm Sarah Landy, and I'm going to speak about the conservation bills. Maybe Kurt Weiss will follow up on this, but there are two bills that are introduced this week that I think really threaten conservation in Iowa. And one is House File 542, maybe what we're referring to. I'm just going to read it because in this bill, counties would be prohibited from expanding parks, wildlife habitat areas, and trails by any amount. Funding the cities and counties have relied upon would be restricted and could not be used for expansion of open spaces and new recreational amenities, including public museums. The state would not be able to purchase land for state parks, wildlife areas, and strategic water projects. Okay. All right. So speak to those two bills. Thank you.
I do not serve on natural resources, but I certainly understand and appreciate, and I'll look further into that bill. I do not, like I said, do not serve on that committee, but thank you for your comments.
As far as the House bill goes, I talked to Representative Seek, and his goal is to start a conversation between like the Heritage Foundation, DNR, several other agencies or committees here in the state. Farm Bureau is one, and see where we can find some common ground on taxes, how much is given to the state, then we have to pay the maintenance on it. So I look at this bill as a work in progress, and hopefully we can find some common ground and see just, he did show me there's a few facts that, in the bill that he's gotten some reports on 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12, 13, and then there's no more reports. So what does that mean? That were they not reported or just not needed or what? But he was interested in finding out the tax credits that were given from 13 on up to today, up to this year. So it's a work in progress. That's and get the conversation going is where we are going to go as a state and federal government on these lands.
Yeah, this is the bill I was alluding to, and I see Kurt standing in the back, because I had not seen the bill. It dropped yesterday, so, but I got emails about the bill before I'd seen it, but I pulled the bill up and read it, swallowed hard, and called Representative Seek, okay, because I understand, and I want to understand, Representative Seek lives in western Iowa. So oftentimes what generates a bill from a particular legislator can also be what experiences are they having in that part of the state? What are they having from their constituents, and what is driving that legislation? And one of the concerns raised is the amount of land that has been acquired, and then especially on the state side, having a hard time of maintaining that and maintaining the parks that we have, and at the same time going out and acquiring land and taking it off of the tax rolls and then not being able to maintain it properly. So that's part of the genesis of some of the conversation. That bill's got what we might call the kitchen sink in it, and it is far too broad, far too deep. So when you look at the county conservation type projects, I think they're much better managed, and they fall within the purview of the county and county conservation and our ability to do that. So a great one, in fact, Kurt, I'm using you a lot today, Kurt, but pointed out, and I know the project well for Deep Lakes Park, and the development plans that we have for that project, which is a tremendous addition to our area for canoeing and fishing and swimming, and now we've got projects going for cabins out there. That project would not have been able to go forward if this legislation was in place, and that just doesn't make any sense. And so Representative Seek knows more about the Deep Lakes project than he probably cares to know, but we had a long conversation about that. So I think that in that subcommittee, which is the public hearing, that will take place, and I suspect this bill will have dramatic changes to it, or it won't move forward.
I also think it's a work in progress. I made some calls yesterday after I got a bunch of emails, and there's some concern. But I will say, though, I think it's natural resources. But I do think that most likely, from what I found out, it probably will get through the committee, the subcommittee, and the committee. But I'm sure there'll be a lot of conversation about it. So anyway, I'm sure I'll hear from some of you regarding it.
I also brought up the bill and read it after receiving a lot of input, and I understand Representative Seek's coming from Western Iowa is different than Eastern Iowa, but my job isn't to represent Western Iowa. I won't be supporting it. I don't think it's going to come up to a full floor vote.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Sandy Stanley, and I live here in Muscatine, and I'm speaking to House Study Bill 185, which I think is Mr. Carlson's bill. It's the Mid-American Net Metering Bill. This bill will undermine net metering, a policy that allows customers with solar to be compensated for the electricity they add to the grid by imposing needlessly high fees and fixed charges. The utility wants to dissuade new solar customers. The intent of the bill is to halt new customer-generated clean energy. Mid-American has made profits last year of revenues of $605 million in 2018 alone, and this would increase their revenues. It is not fair for the utility to demand solar customers pay demand charges. Solar customers contribute energy to the grid at times. While I understand why Mid-American wants to hold its monopoly status in the state of Iowa, I don't understand why the Iowa legislators would support this. We want to talk, our future for our children and grandchildren is important. Climate change is real. I have two questions. One is, what is your thoughts on the bill? And the second is, do you know how much of the utilities infrastructure has been fully depreciated? Thank you.
I have not read the bill and don't serve on Commerce, so Walter, I'd like to cede my time to Gary on this.
Yeah, I'm not on Commerce either, so I haven't spent some time on it, but I'm going to.
Thank you.
Well, I am on Commerce, and the bill's in my committee. Okay. And so the concept of net metering is to allow those people who are in generation to be able to sell whatever excess electricity they generate, and when they are not generating, that they still get electricity from whoever their utility provider is. But so they are using the electricity market. You have generation, which is the power plants. You have transmission, which is the high voltage lines, and you have distribution, which then brings it down to your homes, the 110, 220, 440. And you have to maintain the transformers and the poles and lines. When somebody is generating, they never are generating all the electricity demand that they need at every minute of the day. So at nighttime, if they have a solar unit, for example, at nighttime, they're not generating because the sun's not out. So they're using electricity from whoever their utility provider is. Especially in the summertime, in sunny days, they're generating much more than they have and that they can use. So they're selling that excess. The idea of net metering is the meter moves forward when you're buying electricity, and it moves backwards when you're selling it into the grid. But you use the transmission lines and the distribution lines for whichever direction you're having, whether you're using it or whether you're selling it. So the idea behind this bill is that the way electricity rates work is that you're not to transfer cost from one member in a class of customers, so one household versus another household. And the way some of the net metering works today is they are not paying for their use of distribution and transmission. So this bill is addressing that from a fairness perspective, that they are contributing to that. If you, in summer months, if you're generating more, it carries over. Okay, so it nets out.
That I get.
And there are a lot of people who are very welcoming of this legislation, especially a lot of people on fixed income, low income, who don't have solar and don't want to transfer. If you look at the RECs and the municipal utilities, they have essentially used this kind of process for years. And so if you had solar under Muscatine Power and Water, this is how you would be, it's being handled today. If you had it under Eastern Iowa Light and Power, this is how it's being handled today. This is not really a revolutionary concept. What this is a fairness concept to make sure that everybody pays for the portion of the system that they utilize.
I think you had it explained very well, Gary. Thank you.
Like I said, I'm not on Commerce either, but it sounds like Gary is the expert on that one. Thank you, Gary.
Hi, good morning. My name's Chloe Peathott. I'm a student here at MCC. I'm here representing the MCC Young Democrats. We're just interested in any updates or information you could provide about the public funding for community colleges in the area.
Thank you for your question. You know, education is a priority for all of us. You know, I can speak for the Senate Republicans. We just passed out through the Education Department an increase of $128.6 million more for education. Now, that's K through 12. So we haven't really addressed the community colleges or the Regents universities yet. But let me tell you, you know, the previous 2 years were very tough budget years. You know, I sympathize. I sat on the Burlington School Board for 9 years, and I know how tight budgets. I sat on the Education Board when Governor Culver had a 10% across the board budget cut. I mean, those were devastating. We can budget for will be given out to the community colleges.
I brought a few figures with me today. When we're talking education appropriations, for year 19, there was $912 million, $675,000. $487 appropriated. The governor for this year, for year 20, she has her wish to be $963,275,618. And the House Republicans are at 961 and $961,044,271. You drop on down to the Senate's targets, and they're just a little under us. Their target is at $946,955 and $971, excuse me. They are under the House and the governor. So now the negotiations will go on between the House and the Senate. We'll come up with a number and see what the governor says about it. We'll take all her considerations in. The House appropriated, we're trying to get $7 million to the community colleges this year. And then through the last dollar scholarship, which means if you've got scholarships and you can't get any more, that last dollar kicks in and you can apply for that. If you qualify, there's a little list to qualify for it. But the governor had a figure of $17,200,000. We're setting a little, we're close to that, but not quite. So there's going to be a lot of funds coming into the community colleges because that's where the House Republicans think that's the biggest bang for our buck to move Iowa forward in the workforce.
Yeah, so I think there undoubtedly will be an increase in community college funding this year, and it will come in the traditional way we budget, and as Representative Kerr was talking about, in the last dollar scholarship, which is part of the Future Ready Iowa legislation. And that legislation for the last dollar scholarship is aimed exclusively at two-year degree and certification programs, and so that there will be $17+ million in that last dollar scholarship, which will also flow to the community college as well. So in a different way of funding, but the dollars will still end up there.
The Senate's right around the governor's number, but with having $7 million that the House has, that's quite a number. So we'll see what happens there. But I guess what I'd say is most of us here are strong supporters of the community colleges. Some of us actually graduated here, so we support MCC and all the different community colleges.
As a graduate of MCC and former student body president, I am very proud to support Musteen Community College. I think the good news is that all three of us, the Senate, the governor, and the House, are going to have increases. I think that you're going to see a very healthy increase, and I just want to say that I'm looking forward to seeing you guys this week as you come up. And John, is it correct that I'm quoting you right, that I'm your favorite Republican in the history of the world? Is that accurate? Okay.
Thank you, guys. We'll look forward to seeing you on Monday.
My name is Shelley Cervidillo. I'm a registered nurse and a veteran of the United States Army. I'm a disabled veteran, PTSD. I wrote a bill, House File 210. It is a bill that asks that we give veterans a 24-hour hold, point of care, wherever they seek care. We have Iowa Hospital Association that's saying no when they're a hospital, when they're declaring as lobbyists because they think that the governor's new mental health care bill with the care centers everywhere is going to help with that. Unfortunately, that law doesn't help because the word veteran is not in that bill anywhere. So we can do a couple of things. We can add my bill to that law so that those care centers will also accept veterans. But the end goal is the same. We cannot play hot potato with our veterans. They need that 24-hour hold anywhere they seek care, whether at those care centers, at their local community hospitals, anywhere they go. Because what happens is 70.3% of our veterans are committing suicide by firearm. That means they have a means, a ways, ideation, a plan. They have a way to do it, and they're falling through the cracks. We need to help them wherever they seek care. And I would ask that you please do that. Thank you.
Shelley, I've read the bill. I think it's a good bill, and I plan to support it.
Thank you.
You know, I really appreciate your work on this because I have the green alert bill that I talked about last time for veterans if they're in distress, and so much time's gone by and they haven't heard from them. So it kind of goes along with it. And because of that bill, we've looked at the suicide rates and how much of a concern it is. So it's similar to what you're working on. So I appreciate that.
Will you support my bill, please?
I don't know if House File 210 will hit the floor, but I think the spirit of that will be, and yes, some of it is incorporated in the mental health with the access centers, because that's ultimately getting people easier access when they need it. I have talked to Representative Lundgren about your bill, and she has it under consideration as well as some other legislation. So whether that specific bill moves forward or whether the substance of the bill is incorporated, I think that's really more the direction it will go.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, I'd just say what Gary did about 210. I don't know if it's that specific bill, but the intent to help veterans and those needing help like that is Shannon Lundgren is taking a lot of bills under consideration and trying to get maybe one bill to cover everything that's needed. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
I had a son-in-law who was in a tank, the initial push into Baghdad when they ousted Saddam Hussein. He lived in a tank for 3 weeks, saw the horrors of war. And when my daughter tells me that he'd wake up in nightmares and tears and sweats, it's very real. It's very real for our veterans, and I certainly will support that effort. Thank you.
Veterans Creed, we leave no one behind.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
When Mrs. Clark is done, we'll take our break.
I'm Jean Clark from Muscatine. I'm not opposed to Second Amendment rights. However, House File 259, I am opposed to. We need a license to drive and to cut hair. I surely would think we would need a permit to carry a weapon and to use it. Related to that, House File 31 and House File 65 are written to eliminate the purchase and use of multi-burst triggers and large capacity ammunition devices. There's a big difference between being able to carry a gun and needing multi-burst triggers and large capacity ammunition in terms of public safety. So I would like to know your thoughts on, will you support bills to limit multi-burst triggers and large capacity ammunition? And I also want you to rethink if you're planning to support House File 259. Think about the fact that we need a license.
Thank you very much for your question. This is it's a thin line between the right to carry and unlimited access. And I certainly believe in the process the way it is today. I really do. Like I said, I do not carry, but I respect those who do, those law-abiding citizens. Now, there's the key point to me. If they're a law-abiding citizen, they pertain to our, what Bobby chooses to do might be different than what I choose to do. And that is his right. And it's my right, too. So I respect those, but we are a nation of laws and orders. And I firmly believe in that. So, like I said, these are House files. I haven't read them yet, so I need to know when they come over to the Senate side, or I'm sure companion bills might be written. And so I'll take a serious look at that. Thank you for your question.
Could you tell me those two House files again?
House File 31 deals with multi-burst triggers, and House File 65 is large capacity ammunition devices.
I'll look into those, but I'm going to vote for 259. I think it's much needed to be in our Constitution, and I support that wholeheartedly.
There's multiple bills regarding Second Amendment rights. I'm not familiar with 31 and 65 specifically, Gene, but House File 259, there's some really good things in that bill. There's some parts of it that I have some pause on, and I've been talking to Representative Winchell about those specific things, and I think he is working through some amendments. I think it's important to remember there's been some misinformation about those bills because it still talks about background check is still a part of being able to guns, and still having the permit to buy is still part of that legislation. So it's not quite as far as some people are understanding that bill.
But not to carry, correct?
I'm not sure on the carry language in one of the bills is different than the other. That's right. I'm not sure 259 versus the other one. One of them, if you have the background check and you have the permit to buy, I mean, today you can carry and open. The permits are about carrying concealed.
Right.
And one of them has that if you have the background check and the permit to buy, you would not have the permit to carry. You would not have to get a separate permit to carry, and the other one still has permit to carry.
I mentioned earlier I support the Second Amendment, but keep in mind that only like 10 or 15% of the bills that are put in are signed by the governor. So just because it's put in doesn't necessarily mean it's going to pass. And you can sometimes you can kind of figure that out. You know, it doesn't get out of the subcommittee or something like that. That's probably the first sign. But you do need to watch both chambers. So, and again, I'm not on judiciary, but we're gonna. I'm sure after this next week, get through that first funnel, then obviously there'll be more conversation about those type of bills.
With all due respect, I think I made myself clear on the Second Amendment. What is important to me on that carry bill is that it does include background checks. I think that's important. One concern I've actually had came from gun owners who worry about Iowa not having a permit, being able to have reciprocity with other states. So I am still working through those concerns, but as far as a large capacity ban, no, I will never support that. You're giving yourself, with all due respect, a very false sense of security that, oh, good, we got this ban passed. Now all the criminals will listen to us. No criminal decides not to perform an act because we pass a bill. What you're doing is restricting law-abiding citizens from having a right to defend themselves. So I believe in common sense, but you're never going to get me to vote against the Second Amendment. It's not going to happen.
Okay, we'll take a break now. We'll start again as per the clock over there at 10 minutes to.
All right, looks like everybody's settled. Jay Brady, Muscatine. Couple things. One is I just want to follow up for Sarah. You know, if we're having problems funding open space, which we have about 1% open space, everything else is used, taxed, et cetera, we might want to think about looking at that sales tax and getting that 1 cent for, or percentage or whatever it is for conservation to move forward. The second question I have is the judiciary situation with partisan judges, independent selection, independent judiciary. What's the status, and can you comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I serve on judiciary, and I'm the only member up here, I believe, so far that has voted for that. A couple facts I want to get out there to folks, because the alarming amount of disservice to the information I think that exists today is mind-boggling. The Bar Association put out a survey using the Nationwide Chamber of Commerce, and they alleged, and I agree, that we've got one of the top 10 best judicial systems in the country. That being said, we're not number one, and there's no reason we can't see improvements. What people don't want to know, that don't like the changes, is that our model is modeled after the Missouri model. Do you know what rank, according to the Bar Association president, Missouri model, which we're modeled off of, is? 49th. Do you know what model we're going to be going towards? It's the Connecticut model. Do you know how many states are ranked ahead of us with the exact same model or a close hybrid of it? 4 of them ahead of us are ranked, 4 are ranked ahead of us using that exact same model. So this notion that we're magically creating something out of thin air to be political is false. You can still disagree that you don't want to change, but it's not mythical and it's not something that we've just created out of thin air. This notion the current process isn't political is not true. It's as political as it gets right now. We're not taking attorneys out of it. Attorneys will still be involved. Attorneys are important. That being said, so are the rest of us. And right now, in 2017, 9% of eligible attorneys voted for the commissioners. 9%. Once they're under scrutiny, 25% is all that voted in 2018. That's 0.05% of the Iowa population that was only involved in this. This brings back the power to the people while including attorneys.
The current system, there's 8 lawyers elected by the lawyers with no government oversight. Of course, then you have the one senior judge. So you have more lawyers involved than the citizens involved, because there's 8 citizens that the governor appoints, and then they're approved basically by the Senate. But as far as the goal of the reform, we're not changing the system of elect judges. We're not changing to a federal system. We're not, you know, the lawyers are still involved in the whole process. We're not going to change that. And you know, unfortunately, I think this has gotten kind of political. But again, I keep saying this today. I don't know why these issues come up, but I'm not on judiciary. But this is something we have talked about a lot. I don't know whether it's going to come together or not. I would say there seems to be a lot of support in the Senate. I'm not really so sure where they're at on the House. But again, I think it's something we're going to hear an awful lot about.
So this bill is not about demonizing attorneys, right? It's about getting their input on judicial selection, and they do have good insight because they deal a lot with that. It is surprising also how many attorneys also contact about thinking that we need to make changes, and even some judges who have contacted us about needing to make some changes. But the conversations are ongoing. So from where the bill was originally introduced, and I'm not on judiciary, but Representative Holt, who chairs judiciary, sits next to me, so we have conversation about lots of bills. You know, there's been an amendment proposed that kind of keeps the district judges process a little bit more similar to the way it is today. So it's still evolving legislation. There's public hearings, there's input, there's input from the judicial groups, there's input from the attorneys, and there's input from, you know, a broad swath of population. I'm not exactly sure where this bill will end up, but I would agree wholeheartedly with one thing Bobby said. The process is political today. It's just a matter of the process you use for it to be political.
These the judges that nominate and pick the judges today also argue the cases in front of these people. So that makes me think that it, and I'm sure that it has some political intent possibly there. But what this bill does for those who think the judges should be on the ballot, Supreme Court and district judges, I think this is a good compromise between where it is today and where they want to be having these people on a ballot. So I think this bill will move forward in the House, and but like these other guys said, other gentlemen said, there still could be an amendment or two put on the bill to sway it one way or the other.
The system is political, no matter how you look at it. I don't care whether you got a Democratic governor or a Republican governor. It's political. Look at the national level. We're dealing with state levels, but on the national level, our current Attorney General, Bill Barr, I think is his name, when he was appointed Attorney General under the George Bush administration, he passed unanimously. Just recently, when President Trump nominated him to be the Attorney General, strictly bipartisan vote. I mean, so it happens, both sides. You see it, obviously, in Des Moines. You see it in Washington, D.C. The attorneys that I have talked to, and I've talked to all the judges in the 8th Judicial District about this, they're really split about 50-50. You know, some of them say, yeah, there's some reform that's really needed, and others, county attorneys too, have told me, well, the system works pretty well. So I'm waiting to see. I do not serve on judiciary, but I'm waiting to see how the bill comes across over on the Senate side. And currently, if the vote was today, I would vote to stay exactly the way we are.
And I would vote to let Mrs. Hahn have the next question.
Thank you. My name is Catherine Hahn. I'm actually a parent of a young man now who's an adult, has severe disabilities, as well as that professionally my life's work is working with families and kids with disabilities. So again, I want to speak to Medicaid and the MCOs. I know the oversight, you guys have done a lot of work on it, but we have a long ways to go. We still have differences. You can get certain things under one MCO, you cannot get them under the other. So we need either a standard read of menus, like for example, car seats will be funded by one, they will not be funded by the other. Standards will be funded by one, will not be funded by the other. You know, so somewhere we need to find some common ground as to what is happening. And then the other relationship to that is actually my concern is on the long-term services side, is right now the MCO hold all the cards. They do the case management, they do the assessment, and then they do the funding and provide this, you know, to the service providers. So we have some issue about having one person hold all the cards, so there's no conversation back and forth. And I just kind of want your take on where you think it's going.
Well, thank you, Catherine. You know, it's been an issue that I've tried to deal with in my 2.5 years in Des Moines. A glaring example for me on the pharmacy side is that a certain MCO will pay for the insulin auto-injector, but they won't pay for the pen needles. I mean, one is worthless without the other one. You got to have both. So, you know, there's a lot of give and take and working out the individual issues. Senator Mark Segabart from Western Iowa made a good point. He says, technically the 50 senators and the 100 representatives up here, we're 150 case managers for the individual needs in our districts. So when I have an issue that's been brought to me by a provider in my Senate district, I go directly to Director Foxhoven, forward on that email, asking for his explanation, please look into this. And he's been very good as far as getting back to me and trying to get these issues resolved. So I'm with you 100%.
Yes, you would think we'd have one set of rules to govern, but that's not the way we always work, I guess you could say. And that is a great goal for the Human Services Department to work towards. To me, it just common sense. But maybe with this, I don't know. The case management assessment and funding, I receive not probably too many emails about this, but a few, and I know it's a problem for, especially for the disability of children that's around the state. So it's something we still need to look into, not just children too, but it seems like the emails I get are more children-driven. So thank you for your question.
Well, Kath, you and I are kind of on speed dial with each other, and as you know, we made some great progress with Harmony House.
I appreciate all the work you've done.
And that took some time to get through. I will say the department did try to work through and how do we find a solution for all the medically fragile. And then we did change the MCO reimbursement rate, as Kath knows so well. So those who are the most severely disabled have the higher numbers, so the 5 and 6s. More dollars are now moving into support for the severely disabled. And I believe we both agree that we have Harmony House is in safe ground here in Muscatine. So the other issue is, so understanding, getting these rules so that they're always implemented correctly. And humans do make mistakes in their interpretation of these rules. You know, many times we've looked into things, tried to find them, and we do find some clarification in those, and we do get clarification. And so the couple that you mentioned, you might send me another email on those. We're working on one right now to get those specifically clarified to that. But I have found the directors to be pretty easy to work with as far in listening. And as you know better than anybody, I've had a lot of those meetings with those folks.
Well, Kath, thanks for everything. You've been very good, real respectful over the years when we've talked about anything. So, and you're very patient too. So we appreciate that. So, the inconsistency really bothers me too from one company to another. I mean, that's terrible. But one thing we are hearing that we're hearing it is getting better, and we're even having some Democrats that are kind of saying we do see it getting better. So that's kind of happening. So, but we're going to stay on top of it.
Thank you for the question. I got to sit in on the oversight meeting with the MCOs and Jerry Foxhoven last week. So while you know all these, for the education of everybody out there, I think some stats to show that it's improving, but that we need to continue to be diligent on the improvements. Director Foxhoven testified that case concerns are down 80%. Now, 1% is not okay. So I'm not saying, oh good, we're at 80%, so we're done. Continuing to make that 100 and 0 is the goal, of course. Is it in July, Kathy, that we're going to add the third MCO?
I think we are, yeah.
We're going to add a third MCO in July, which I think is a very good thing. And the director was very clear that he's going to allow people to vote with their feet. They're going to be able to go to whichever one they want. Now, that being said, you can't switch every day to be able to, like Tom said, get one part of what you need here, one part. So there needs to be a menu of equalization, and I think personally that should be a prerequisite for somebody even qualifying to be an MCO, and that should be retroactive as far as I'm concerned, so that you're not having one MCO providing one part of your care and another the rest while neither providing both. And so I'm, as oversight member as opposed to chair, I don't have the same influence I used to, but I still have access to the information early. And now that I know that you and Gary talk on speed dial, then I'm just going to bother Gary more.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you very much.
I'm Roger Landy. I live in Muscatine, and I thought today I would get some information from to respond to items raised in today's opinion issue from Des Moines Register. Now, I'm going to raise questions that come to mind because of 3 comments in or editorials from the Des Moines Register, and 2 that come from letters to the editor. And one of the more puzzling ones to me was one that was sent by a gentleman from Rhodes, Iowa, who said that thousands of Iowans are calling for moratorium on new or expanded factory farms.
Mr. Landy, your time is running low. Could you conclude your remarks?
Pardon?
Your time is running low. You were allowed 1 minute, and your minute is about to expire. Could you conclude your remarks?
I will try to hurry, Walter. He says that one legislator who is stalling any action on this, Dean Fisher, is shamefully, single-handedly blocking the bill because he will not give refusing to assign a House file to a subcommittee. Can your processes be subjected to one individual saying, that doesn't get a number, end of story?
Well, the answer is yes, but with all due respect, Roger, I don't support it either, and I don't think it has even close to the number of votes. I support agriculture.
Well, no, this may be a bad bill. I don't know.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yes, so sorry, I didn't mean to misinterpret your question. So how the process works is a committee chair has the ability to decide whether a bill gets assigned or not. Now, that's a great thing for really bad bills, but not a great thing for good bills. There's still a way around that, though, in the House. I don't know how the Senate works, where I think I'm partial to the House, no offense, Mark and Tom. But the way around that, Roger, is that if I feel passionately about something, I don't just get told, no, I'm not going to run that. We can offer that up as an amendment. And so if there's a germane bill to whatever is being stopped by one individual, the minority and the majority have the ability to offer an amendment with that exact same language.
Okay. It doesn't sound like the smoothest operation in the world.
You know,
in any event, the other
Mr. Landy, your time has expired. We have to let other people talk. I'll recognize you again once everybody else has had a chance to ask a question.
Okay.
and sometimes if you like a bill too, when the standings bill, sometimes you can put policy in to kind of keep it going too. And I've seen situations where, you know, you have oversight that's not funnel proof, and of course Ways and Means and Appropriations. So sometimes they'll go into a vehicle that there'll be some more time to work on it. So there can be more time. Well, they say nothing's dead till it's dead.
Critical key is the answer is yes. Okay, so I probably received 90 bills this year, and about 45 of them aren't moving at all. Now, they may not move because there are other bills of the same subject, and we may be advancing another one. Sometimes I will assign the same subcommittee two very similar bills to see is there language that should be melded together. But clearly, as part of the priority system, the chairman has the ability to not advance any legislation, and I utilize that.
I'm not a committee chairman, but if I'm assigned a bill for a study bill to have a committee meeting on, I will hold that committee meeting and find out more about the bill, and then that relieves me if I pass it on. If three people are on the study committee, right now two Republicans and a Democrat, and if we have the lobby come in, which they do, or any interested person, and they add some knowledge to that bill that I don't understand, or you know, adds to the bill, or if it takes it away, then we either sign to have it go to committee, or it dies right there in the subcommittee. I usually try and hold a subcommittee on every bill that I've been assigned to give it a good faith look and see you know, the merits of the bill, if it goes on or if it doesn't.
Thank you, Roger, for your comment. Like other members have said up here, I do not serve as a chairman of any of these committees, but quite often I'll be assigned the chairman of a subcommittee. And I think it's important in the process that we hear from the citizens. Now, I had two bills last week that dealt with vaccinations. And although I was firmly in favor of vaccinating as a matter of public health, I held those committees. I mean, I had more than 100 people in that room voicing their opinions about it. And it's imperative to me, if I'm going to run a subcommittee, that we hear from those citizens who have made the trek to Des Moines and want to voice their opinions to their representative, their elected officials. If we don't listen to them, I mean, it just shows that government's a scam. And believe me, I think it's representative government is the way it should be. I'm going to listen to both sides of every subject or every bill that's I'm presented with to run through. I might not agree with it, but I'm going to listen to all those citizens who come forward. So, like I said, that's just kind of how the system works. But thank you for your question, Roger.
The other issue that I read is relevant to what you've already done.
Your time is up.
Okay.
You have to wait till the lady here have a chance.
That's all right.
Hi, my name is Jamie Verks. I teach preschool down at L&M, and I live here in Muscatine. My question, first of all, I want to say that thank you, Mr. Lofgren, for your amendment to Senate File 1190. I appreciate, for those of you who do not know, this was a bill that was going to eliminate or could eliminate the restriction or the mandate that every school has a school nurse and a school librarian. Although I don't always see eye to eye with you, I do appreciate your amendment to take that out of the bill. I am wondering about the requirements for each school district not to have to cover the employee background checks and dental screenings, vision screenings, and what your thoughts are on that and why that was left in there. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your dedication to our children. You know, I kind of have a little bit of a mixed opinion on this. I feel that those types of decisions can be best made at the local level. I believe in our superintendent and our Board of Education making those decisions. For 150 bureaucrats in Des Moines to make those decisions to tell you and your school how to best educate our kids and whether they need a nurse or whether they need a librarian, that's up to the school districts. You know, what might be different in L&M might be different in Burlington or Des Moines Dowling. I mean, you know, that's just kind of the way it is. So I will always vote more for local control. I think those decisions are more prudent and much more respective of the communities that they serve if we leave that up to the L&M superintendent, Mr. Van Sickle, and the school board there at L&M. So local control is the way to go, in my opinion.
This is a Senate bill, I believe. The only 1190, okay, I wrote it down here wrong. But anyhow, all I know about this bill is what I heard on the radio coming home the other night. And I think it's Amy Sinclair was Bill, and she was on radio talking about it, so I'll see what it looks like when it comes over to the House.
Yeah, I did have a chance to talk with Senator Sinclair for a couple of seconds about that bill. And the crux of that bill was a long list of things that were determining whether these are things that should be mandated by the state or whether they should be local control. A lot of the publicity about the bill focused on librarians and that area. But there were also things in the bill about the state mandating what cleaning supplies school districts use and a number of those things. So the crux of the bill was to look at how many things that over time have been mandated, should they be mandated or should they go back to local control? And so there's a long list. Obviously some amendments took place that said, no, we want to leave the mandates on those things, or that's what the Senate believed, they would leave mandates. But I think you have to look at the bill in its total content. There was nothing in the bill that said school districts have to get rid of school nurses or have to get rid of librarians. It was who was in the ability to make the decision as to whether you had them or not.
Tom and Gary had mentioned all the local control. It really was a local control. They weren't getting rid of anything. They were just trying to make them make the decision. Because face it, you know, some of the larger districts are a lot different than a smaller district, how they want to handle things. So, you know, each their own in some situations.
It's one of the bills I haven't had a chance to read yet, but I heard enough about it. I would have not been able to support it without Senator Lofgren's amendment, so I appreciate that. And my goal on this is going to be to talk to my superintendents and school boards and my teachers. I've got them all on an email list. I'll forward out the final version to them and then see how they want me to vote. Thanks for the question.
My question is regarding the House, oh, sorry. My question is regarding the House Study Bill 185, a follow-up more or less, which dissuades solar users from installing solar panels even though they would benefit the grid. With climate change affecting constituents and future constituents, what are you doing to combat it?
I own a recycling business. I had geothermal installed in my house, and I clean up waterways for fun. Is what I do about it personally. But as far as commenting on the bill, I don't mean to buck the question here, but I have not read it yet, and I would again just cede my time to Gary because he is the expert on it.
And yeah, being a House file, I haven't worked much on it, but now Gary has.
Well, for round two, it's in my committee, and you know, I don't come to the same conclusion. You didn't identify yourself, so I'm not sure your first name, but I don't believe that this bill is going to dissuade solar. What this bill is going to do is be a fairness. So for those people who install solar, that they're paying for the part of the grid that they use, and those costs are not being transferred to the people who do not have solar. And that's the crux of the bill. And so there's a lot of rhetoric about that it's going to undo the solar industry, and I just absolutely don't believe that's true.
I yield my time back to Gary on this one because he knows way more about it than I do.
Well, you know, solar is here to stay. You know, what does the International Space Station use? How do they get their power? Solar. You know, another point that I've always tried to reinforce is I think all of us probably, I'll bet the majority of us, do our part to conserve and protect our environment. You know, I recycle glass, plastic, paper, you know, everything I can, I recycle. But the United States has 3% of the world's population. What do we do about the other 97%? India and China are the two biggest polluters in the world. I mean, we don't have a whole lot of input about what we can do for them. All we can do is do our part, and I think the majority of us do. Thank you for your question.
And I cannot remember the last time when we let people have a second question. But before we do, is there anyone who wants to ask a question for the first time who hasn't gone up? Well, I'll recognize the gentleman now for the second time.
Thank you. This is actually a follow-up because of what Bobby Kaufman mentioned with regard to keeping and bearing arms, that laws only affect the law-abiding. The killing that happened in the, unfortunately, in the high school in Florida, laws were violated, and there are laws on the books against murder. This is violated. So that gentleman, and I'll try to find the link, and I'll try to send it to you so you can share it. The gentleman was on a forum, and he pointed out that rifle killings in the United States represents 3% of the killings by firearms, only 3%. So why are they going after rifles that represent 3% as opposed to handguns that represent the 97%? So this is just an end to have a law to restrict law-abiding citizens from gun ownership, whether it's for hunting, for personal collection, whatever the reason. The Second Amendment is specific. It is an individual right. Doesn't come from the government. It's not a permission. It's a God-given right. And so I'll let you all respond. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Like I said, I appreciate those opinions, and it's not the law-abiding citizen we're worried about. You know, it is those who break the law and who have absolutely no regard for your individual rights or your rights. You know, it's a controversial issue, but I don't think very many of us are afraid of the law-abiding citizen who chooses to carry.
I cannot argue with you a bit on your question and answer for this. But ultimately, for the constitutional amendment, for the Second Amendment, getting it in the Iowa Constitution, that people that vote are going to have the final decision on this, and I think that's exactly where it needs to be.
Yeah, and I'll be interested in that link because I'm not aware of anything that in legislation that is taking, because long guns are treated differently in the laws than handguns. And so I'll be interested to see your link on that. But as we've all said before, we're supportive of the Second Amendment, and the fact that that has to pass through two successive legislative sessions and then goes to the vote of the people is democracy in its finest forms.
I know you're in Bobby Kaufman's district in Cedar County, but we appreciate your comments today. I hope you keep coming down here and telling us some more things.
Few things get me more passionate than defending Second Amendment rights. You look back to 2010 when we did shall issue, which means that sheriffs shall issue a permit to carry as opposed to may, which led liberal county sheriffs to not give people their constitutional rights. This was going to be the wild, wild west. It was going to be shooting in the streets, and it was going to be like the old Tombstone movies. Well, guess how many crimes in Iowa have been committed with a gun? How many murders in Iowa have been committed with a gun by a law-abiding, permit-carrying Second Amendment supporter in the last 8 years, 9 years now? Zero. Not one. Zilch. Zero. Nada. Zero. I hear people say, well, how can you know, people are going to speed anyway. Should we just do away with speeding laws? People are going to, cook meth. Should we just do away with those? Well, you don't have a constitutional right to make or use meth. You don't have a constitutional right to speed. The Founding Fathers found the right to bear arms to be the second most important amendment in the founding of this country. And so I'm never going to apologize for standing up for that right. Thank you for being here.
We'll recognize Mr. Clark for the second time.
I have not read this proposed constitutional amendment. If it's keyed to the federal Constitution, I would just point out here that the last time the Supreme Court ruled on it, they said that the Second Amendment right to bear arms is not an unlimited right, and government can regulate.
You want a response on that? Does that ask for a response? Well, then I'll ask the legislators to respond.
And there are restrictions. There are many common sense restrictions, such as background checks. But the thing I always push back against is I'm stunned that people think that when a law passes to restrict your 2A rights, you're all of a sudden safe. It's a false sense of security, and I think people that believe that are setting themselves up to be in more danger than having somebody that wants to commit a crime not be able to abide by that law. It's absolutely not a bogus argument. That's dead false.
Dan, you're right. And as far as that, we can put rules on it, and that's why background checks exist and those kind of rules that do exist, and so that's in concert with that. They're not necessarily diametrically opposed ideas either.
I really have nothing else to add. Thank you for your comments. So I do appreciate hearing both sides of every argument. That's how it should be. And I want to say something quickly here before we run out of time and Walter cuts me off. I appreciate a civil forum. We've all experienced the yelling, screaming, cussing, one-finger salutes, physical assaults, believe me. So this is the way a forum should be held, right here. We've got, I'm going to guess, 50 citizens here involved in the process. You want to speak your mind. You want to have your elected officials listen to you. And I think all of us do. And I just want to thank all of you for being respectful of the process. Thank you very much.
And you will be the last question, after which the legislators will wrap this thing up.
Okay. Hello. My name is Daniel Salazar, speaking for the first time. Now, I'd like to talk about a Bill 1054, if hopefully you guys have some knowledge on that, eliminating the statute of limitations. Now, I teach religious education at St. Mary Matthias Catholic School, and on Wednesday night when we had it, there was a girl who had to step out of class because of the topic. The topic was sexual abuse. And she confided in me about certain things that happened with her and her father, her biological father, and how things didn't move forward legally because the statute of limitations expired. Do you know if with this bill we will be able to go back on cases like this and do work on that?
Thank you, Daniel. Was that House file, 1050, or Senate file? Which? What?
I'm not sure, but it's 1054.
All right, I'll check that out. But thank you for your comments. I'm going to look into this further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I don't recognize that bill, but that doesn't mean it's not a House bill. We'll check into it and hopefully have an answer next month for you.
I'm sorry, I don't, but I don't think we have any House bills in the 1,000 numbers, so I think that must be a Senate file bill. but it was 1054, is that what you said?
Yes, sir.
All right, so I'll note that. I just don't know what the language of the bill is. But you can also send us an email too with your contact information. We don't have to wait till the next forum to get back to you, okay?
Most likely in judiciary. I know Bobby is in the House, but it's probably over in the Senate. So I think all of us will do a little checking on it for you. Thanks.
Great question. If it does what you state it does, I believe that's going to get a great audience this year, but I have not read that Senate file, but because I do serve on judiciary, if you want to include me in that email, I'll forward you, if it makes it through the funnel, what the House file number would be so you can read it, see if you have the same intent of support for it. Thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you.
And we're going to have closing remarks. So I'm going to ask Senator Green to start the closing remarks. He has to leave because he has an appointment in Wapello at 11 o'clock. So, and we don't want him, breaking the laws on the way down. So, Senator Green?
Yeah, I'm riding with Dave, but again, thank you. I appreciate, like I said earlier, I just appreciate the process. I don't think I know too many of you out here personally, but it's great. Well, I do know that guy. But this is how it should be. I enjoy coming up to Muscatine. It's something that I think sometimes our process, whether it's city council meetings, school board, or a forum with your elected officials that are going to Des Moines, this is how the process should be. Respectful, compassionate, understanding, both the position that we share or a difference of opinion. So again, thank you very much. I look forward to next month.
Yes, I echo those comments. Let me just tell you what I do with the comment. I had wrote down 15 questions today. And what we do is go back, and on Mondays around noon, we'll have a quad meeting. I know that doesn't mean anything to you, but it's the section I sit in, all get together and they come down and they say, did you have a forum this weekend? Yes, I'm going to have 2 this weekend, and I'll take back these questions and tell the leader of that quad meeting what we've talked about here today, whether it be the MCOs, and that's always a weekly question that we get on different forums around the state. So these will not just close the book and come back next month and open the book. They'll get discussed and gone over and looked at. So any question, I think is fair game here in the state. So please come back next month, and we'll have a lot more to talk about, I'm sure, next month after we get done with the funnel week.
Thanks. One other comment about, since I ended up being the solar guy today, is the young man asked some other questions about what are other things that are doing to continue to advance solar. And I would say it's not just about solar, it's about renewables. Just like it wasn't that many years ago, we didn't have much wind energy in Iowa, and we've done a lot of things, and wind has actually grown dramatically. So it's solar, it's biomass, or whatever. Well, this bill talks about making sure there's a fairness issue as far as how rates are paid. It does not address any of the legislation because it's intended to state that legislation about the federal tax credits that are there for people to buy solar, the state tax credits that are there for people to buy solar, the sales tax exemptions for people to buy solar. So there are a number of programs to help subsidize move into this new technology so that it can continue to grow. One shouldn't think, well, we're working on a bill to make sure that we don't have adverse reaction to people on their rates from solar people or biomass people or pyrolysis people or whatever technology they may want to use to generate some kind of additional power, but it is really about the infrastructure of how that is done fairly for everyone.
I also appreciate everybody here. Also, too, there's some other bills that maybe that just kind of stalled that are still out there, but because of the funnel, like I have one that's the hands-free bill I spent a lot of time on. The cyclists really appreciate that one, and that's in Ways and Means. But what's happening is they're just kind of like hey, Mark, we're not going to deal with this. We have funnel coming up. So once funnel's done, then some of these other bills will start going again, and then they'll progress forward. So, but thanks again for everybody being here.
I just want to echo Senator Green's comments. This has been one of the best forums of the year for me. I was in Iowa City a couple of weeks ago, and one person requested that I, quote, choke on my puke and die. So I just smiled and asked if they were grumpy that day. I also appreciate the difference of opinions. Mr. Clark, we would agree on a lot, but I have a lot of respect for you, so I appreciate hearing your side of things and those that don't agree with me on things. You've heard a lot about the funnel. In state government, we have 60 bills that we're trying to winnow down to about 20 that are going to actually pass, and so we'll be working on that hard. I'm proud of the fact that we, due to tough budget decisions in previous years, we're making good investments in education this year in community colleges and K-12 public schools, but most importantly, we're only spending 97.2% of our ongoing revenue. That is critically important because it prevents the next disaster from being underfunded. It keeps the emergency fund full. It prevents future de-appropriations. It's extremely fiscally responsible, and so that I'm grateful for. A couple quick things. Unfortunately, I will not be here on April 6th. I wanted to publicly announce that. The April Forum in Muscatine is one I cannot attend each year. It's the big sale over at the fairgrounds in West Liberty. It is the #1 day for my farming operation for buying equipment used. So I apologize that I will not be here for that. On special note, Fred Grunder considers seeing me here like his personal Christmas. So if you guys can consult Fred that day, he's going to be sad. And then I'm looking forward, John, to seeing you and the students next week, and I just publicly, I don't want to put any pressure on you, but you're welcome to buy me lunch. So thank you for coming.
Yeah. And I also want to thank everyone for helping make this an island of civility in a sea of strife. So we'll see you all next month.